Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we return to the Appalachian Mountains in the heart of winter, where silence hides something darker. 7 true stories, all of them chilling. Someone may be watching, someone may be waiting. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Passenger in the Snowstorm. It was the first heavy snowstorm of the season, and I had no business being on that mountain road after dark. But work ran late, and I figured I could beat the worst of it if I just took it slow. I live up near Clifftop, West Virginia, in a modest cabin about 20 minutes from any paved road. Most winters I stock up and stay put. But that night, I was caught off guard. By the time I left the office in Fayetteville, the snow had already started coming down hard. Thick flurries blurred the windshield, and even with the high beams on, I could barely see past the curves. The road was empty, no other cars, no tire tracks, just me and the wind slicing across the hood. I had maybe another hour to go before I reached home, but my hands were already stiff from the cold, and my nerves were wearing thin. About 15 miles in, I noticed an old ranger cabin set just off the road. I'd passed it before. It hadn't been in use for years, not since the Forest Service pulled out from that area. But the roof looked intact, and at that point, I was desperate. I pulled in, killed the engine, and sat for a minute in the quiet. The snow muted everything. Just trees, white sky, and my breath fogging up the glass. I figured I'd rest a little, maybe warm up before finishing the drive. But even then, something about the place felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. When I finally pulled into my driveway 2 hours later, the snow was already ankle deep and still falling. My boots crunched loudly as I stepped out, and the cold bit into my face like tiny knives. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and trudged up the steps to the front porch, brushing off a fresh layer of snow from the doorknob. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the old wooden floor greeted me, but something felt off. The cabin was dark and exactly how I'd left it, or so I thought. I flipped on the lights and noticed the faint smell of something damp. Maybe it was just the snow melting off my coat, or maybe the place had gotten musty while I was gone. I dropped my bag near the couch and kicked off my boots, leaving wet prints on the hardwood. But as I passed through the kitchen on my way to the wood stove, I noticed the back door was slightly ajar. That was strange. I always lock it. Always. A blast of cold air hit my face as I stepped closer and pushed it shut. I checked the lock. It was engaged, but it didn't feel like it had been fully latched. Still, I chalked it up to wind and fatigue. It wasn't until I turned to head back toward the living room that I saw them. Faint, wet footprints on the floor. Not mine. Smaller. Bare. Leading from the mudroom toward the stairs. I froze. My boots had just started leaving marks, but these prints were already drying. I hadn't been home more than 5 minutes. Whoever left those prints, they'd been here before me. Or worse, they were still inside. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the wet footprints. They were uneven, like whoever left them had been limping or dragging one foot slightly. I followed them with my eyes as they curved past the staircase and disappeared into the hallway that led to the guest room. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe a pipe had burst and leaked water across the floor. Maybe I'd left a window open and snow blew in. But no, the prints were too deliberate, too human. I moved slowly toward the hallway, every creak of the floor beneath my socks setting off alarms in my brain. The guest room door was slightly open. That door had been closed for weeks. I stepped closer and gently nudged it with the back of my hand. The room was dark, but the moonlight filtering through the window showed just enough. Nothing looked out of place at first glance. The bed was made. The closet was closed. I flipped the light switch. The bulb flickered once before humming to life. Empty. Just blanket shelves, a coat rack in the corner. I exhaled and shut the door again, locking it out of habit. But as I turned back toward the kitchen, something clicked in my head. The cabin. The ranger station I stopped at. I never checked the back seat before driving away. My heart dropped into my stomach. I spun around and ran outside, ignoring the freezing wind that sliced through my jacket. I unlocked the car, threw open the back doors, and checked under the seats. Nothing. I popped the trunk. Just the spare tire jumper cables and a blanket. But something wasn't right. The blanket, I always fold it neatly. Now it was wadded up, pushed into the corner. I picked it up slowly. Underneath, barely visible, was a single crumpled food wrapper I didn't recognize. Someone had been back there. Not long ago. Maybe not even hours ago. My hands started shaking. I hadn't brought anyone home, so how did they get in? I backed away from the trunk slowly, the snow swallowing the sound of my steps. My eyes scanned the woods, the roof line, the shadows along the tree line, searching for movement. Everything was still. Too still. I slammed the trunk shut and bolted back inside, locking the door behind me and pressing my back against it. My breath came in quick bursts, fogging the air. The footprints were still there, leading away from the kitchen, now turning toward the stairs. I hadn't noticed that detail before. Had I missed it, or had they changed? My skin prickled. I grabbed the old hunting rifle I kept mounted above the fireplace, flicked off the safety, and started moving slowly through the cabin. Step by step. Every board beneath me betrayed my presence. I cleared the living room, checked the kitchen again, empty. Then I turned toward the stairs. They creaked as I ascended, every sound amplified by the silence pressing down on the house. At the top, I paused and listened. Nothing. Just the soft moan of the wind outside. I stepped into my bedroom. Clear. The office. Clear. Then I opened the linen closet. And there he was. Curled up on the floor like a child, knees to chest, wrapped in one of my old blankets. His eyes were wide open, staring past me. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just looked at me like I wasn't even real. My hands trembled as I raised the rifle. He blinked once. No fear, no panic, just nothing. I told him to get out. I didn't scream, I didn't ask questions. I just kept the barrel pointed at his chest. He stood up slowly, never breaking eye contact, stepped past me, and walked down the stairs. Out the door, into the snow. Like he knew the way. Like he'd been here before. I stood there for a long time, rifle still in hand, staring at the door he had just walked through. The snow was falling harder now, swirling outside the frosted windows like a curtain. Part of me wanted to chase him, demand answers, but my body refused to move. Eventually, I locked the door again, double-checked every window, and sat on the couch trying to calm my breathing. The house felt foreign, like it had shifted into something unfamiliar the moment he stepped inside. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat with the lights on, listening for footsteps that never came. The next morning, I retraced the footprints outside. His tracks led back down the mountain road, but something strange caught my eye. In the snow just beyond the tree line, barely visible, were more footprints, older, faded, but the same size. They led toward the ranger cabin. I followed them for a while, heart thudding, until I found something half buried beneath the snow. A rusted tin cup, a torn sleeping bag, and a scrap of paper nailed to a tree. my name, written in block letters. It had been there before the storm, before I even stopped. Whoever he was, he had been waiting. And somehow he knew I would come. Story 2. The laughter echoing in the pines. It was the first weekend of December when we decided to hike into the Upper Ridge Trail near Cold Ash Hollow, a remote stretch of pine-covered hills deep in the Appalachian backcountry. There were 3 of us. Me, my brother Caleb, and our longtime friend Jonah. We had done winter hikes before, but never this far out and never this late in the year. Snow had already blanketed the ground, turning the trail into a silent white corridor, surrounded by tall trees and biting wind. The sun dipped fast behind the hills, and we found a clearing near the tree line just before nightfall. We set up camp quickly. A fire, 3 tents spaced in a triangle, gear stacked near the logs. Everything felt routine, safe. Caleb kept cracking jokes to keep things light, and Jonah pulled out a little Bluetooth speaker to play some old blues music as we cooked beans over the fire. By the time the stars came out, the forest was still and quiet, just the occasional creak of ice-laced branches swaying above us. We didn't talk much after dinner, just sat close to the fire, soaking in the cold silence of the woods. It felt peaceful, but something in me was already uneasy. I just didn't know why yet. I woke up sometime after midnight to a sound that didn't belong. At first I thought it was the wind, a low drawn-out moan slipping through the trees. But then it changed. It sharpened. It turned into something I couldn't mistake. Laughter. A man's laughter. Hollow and distant, like it was bouncing between the trees from far down the ridge. I sat up slowly inside my tent, heart starting to thump. I could hear Caleb's soft snoring in the next tent over, and Jonah shifting a bit in his sleeping bag. Maybe he heard it too. I unzipped the tent just enough to poke my head out. The fire had burned down to red coals, casting a dim glow across the snow. The forest was dark, too dark. The laughter came again, this time louder. Closer. It had a strange rhythm to it, like it came in bursts. A few chuckles, a pause, then a loud bark of laughter, like whoever it was had just heard the funniest thing in the world. But there was no one out there. No footsteps, no talking, just laughing. I whispered Caleb's name, then Jonah's. They stirred, and I saw Caleb unzip his tent. He looked at me with wide, sleepy eyes. He had heard it too. That was when we knew something was wrong. We weren't alone anymore. Caleb scrambled out of his tent boots, half-laced jacket barely zipped. Jonah followed seconds later, flashlight in hand, sweeping the tree line with a shaky beam. We stood together near the fire pit, backs toward the fading embers, facing the woods, like it might spit something out at any moment. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against our ears. It was like the entire forest had taken a breath and was holding it. We waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing. Then it came again, this time from the other side. Behind us. Same laugh, same voice, but it had moved. Fast. We spun around, searching with our flashlights, but the light just bounced off the snow and trees. There was no one there. We started shouting, threatening. Jonah even fired his flare gun into the trees, a single red burst that lit the woods for a moment and showed us nothing. No tracks, no shadow, nothing moving, just snow and cold and fear. Then more laughter. This time it sounded like it was circling us. Closer, then distant, then close again. We huddled near the fire and kept our weapons close, but nothing came. No figure, no face, just that voice, mocking, playing, testing us. Hours passed like that. Every time we thought it had stopped, it would start again. A different tone, a different direction, We took turns staying awake, too scared to sleep, each of us silently watching the others to make sure we weren't the only ones hearing it. At one point, Jonah swore he saw a figure dart between two trees, but neither of us could confirm it. By the time the first light crept over the ridge, we were cold, exhausted, and broken in ways none of us could explain. And the laughter, like smoke in the wind, vanished with the dawn. As soon as the first pale streaks of daylight touched the tops of the trees, we started packing without a word. None of us had slept. Our hands were stiff from the cold, and our nerves were frayed thin. The snow had crusted over in the night, crunching underfoot as we scrambled to collapse our tents and shove everything into our packs. No one spoke about the laughter. It was like we were afraid saying it out loud would make it start again. Caleb's hands shook as he tried to tie down the last strap on his bag. Jonah kept glancing back at the woods every few seconds, eyes darting between the trees. I took one last look around the clearing before we left. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest anyone else had been out there. And yet, we knew what we had heard. We started down the trail fast and silent, not bothering to eat or warm up. Our goal was simple. Reach the ranger station by noon. Just get out of the woods. The deeper we moved into the trail, the more normal things started to feel. Birds chirped. Sunlight filtered through the pines. But none of us could shake the feeling that something was still watching us from behind. Still listening. Still waiting for the dark to return. We reached the ranger station just after noon, cold, hungry, and dead silent. The place was empty, locked for the season, but there was a small emergency shelter around back, with a wood stove and a few cots. We got inside, lit a fire, and finally let ourselves breathe. Jonah collapsed onto a cot and pulled his jacket over his head. Caleb just sat there, staring at the wall, lips tight and pale. I was too wired to rest. I kept thinking about the laughter, the way it moved, the way it echoed from impossible places. Something about it hadn't felt human, not completely. I wandered around the shelter to clear my head. There was an old supply cabinet in the back, probably untouched in years. I opened it out of curiosity, expecting dusty blankets and expired cans. Instead, on the top shelf, I found a weathered cassette recorder. It looked decades old. Out of impulse, I hit play. Static. Then a voice. No, not a voice. That laugh. That same twisted, manic laugh we'd heard all night. It played in short bursts, recorded like someone had been listening to it for hours. My blood turned to ice. The tape was labeled in faded ink. January 1993. Then scribbled beneath it, almost illegible. Do not listen after dark. Someone had heard it before, and someone else had made the same mistake we had. Story 3. Someone upstairs. The cabin sat quietly on the slope of a snow-covered hill just outside of Blue Rock, West Virginia. It belonged to my cousin Adam, who had left town for 2 weeks to spend Christmas with his in-laws down in Georgia. He asked me to stay and keep an eye on the place. The timing was perfect. I had just wrapped up a stressful semester of teaching and needed somewhere quiet to clear my head. The drive up was smooth despite the icy roads, and when I pulled into the long gravel driveway, the woods around me were already silent with fresh snow. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the warm smell of cedar and faint wood smoke from the last fire Adam must have burned before leaving. Everything looked exactly as he said. Clean. Organized. Peaceful. I unpacked slowly, setting my things in the guest room, then walked through the house to make sure everything was in order. The living room faced the forest, framed by 2 large windows that glowed with the soft blue light of winter dusk. I made a simple dinner, poured a glass of wine, and settled into the big chair near the fireplace, with a book I had been trying to finish for months. The quiet was a kind I'd forgotten existed. No cars, no buzz of phones, just the occasional pop from the fire and the faint whistling of wind outside. I remember thinking that this place felt untouched by the world. Safe, untouchable. But the stillness had teeth. I just hadn't seen them yet. That first night I slept deeply, more peacefully than I had in weeks. The thick silence wrapped around the cabin like a blanket, and the steady hum of the wind outside lulled me into a dreamless sleep. But the second night was different. I had just turned off the lights and climbed into bed when I heard it. A soft thump, then another. It came from above me from the attic, or maybe the small storage loft Adam kept locked. At first, I convinced myself it was just the house settling, old wood shifting in the cold. But then the sound came again, this time more distinct. A dragging noise, slow, measured, like someone pulling something heavy across the floor. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The guest room was just below the upstairs hallway. There was no reason for anything to be moving up there. I stayed still, holding my breath, listening. Nothing. Just wind. I got up, walked quietly through the darkened hall, and checked the stairs. They creaked under my weight, but nothing stirred above. I flipped on the hallway light and climbed slowly, each step echoing through the house. At the top, everything was quiet. The attic door was closed, the hallway empty. I checked the office, the bathroom, the guest closet. All clear. I even knocked gently on the attic door, half embarrassed with myself. No answer. I returned to bed with my pulse still racing, told myself it was the wind again. But deep down, something had shifted. The air felt different, as if the house was no longer holding its breath, but waiting for mine to run out. The next morning brought sun through the frost-covered windows, and for a while the unease from the night before felt distant, even silly. I made coffee, checked emails, and convinced myself the noises had been nothing more than snow shifting on the roof, or maybe an animal brushing past. The day passed in quiet routine. I worked on grading papers, took a short walk through the snow-covered woods behind the cabin, and came back in the late afternoon just as the shadows began to stretch across the hills. That's when I noticed something strange. The door to the linen closet upstairs was ajar. I hadn't opened it. In fact, I hadn't even gone upstairs at all that day. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe I had left it cracked without realizing. Maybe it hadn't latched. But when I stepped closer, I saw that one of the towels had fallen to the floor like something or someone had brushed against it. I felt a cold prickle run across my neck. I shut the door and went back downstairs, trying not to overthink it. But that night the sounds returned. Faint footsteps, soft but distinct, moving across the floor above. Then silence. Then the faintest knock. 3 gentle taps from somewhere overhead. I sat up in bed, completely still. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it and opened the flashlight app, casting a pale beam of light across the room. Everything looked normal. The heater kicked on with a groan. The pipes rattled. I lay back down, trying to convince myself again that it was the house, just the house, and nothing more. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not from the windows, not from outside, from above. From somewhere within the very structure I had thought was keeping me safe. By the third night, I could no longer pretend it was just my imagination. Something was wrong in that house. The air had changed, heavier, more still. I barely slept, waking every hour to faint creaks above or the soft shuffle of movement that stopped the moment I opened my eyes. Just before sunrise, I got out of bed, poured a splash of cold coffee from the thermos I'd left on the nightstand, and made a decision. I was going to open the attic. I had never been up there before. Adam told me it was just storage. Boxes, old skis, maybe a broken fan or two. But I needed to see it for myself. I climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight in one hand and the other, wrapped around the cold metal of the attic pull cord. I hesitated a moment, listening. Nothing. Then I pulled. The wooden steps unfolded with a groan, the kind that vibrated deep in my chest. I climbed carefully, the light flickering slightly as I reached the top. The attic was bigger than I expected. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight. Boxes lined the far wall. Everything was still, silent. But then I saw it. A sleeping bag, unzipped, nestled in the far corner beside a half-empty jug of water and 2 crumpled food wrappers. And next to it, a notebook. I stepped closer, heart pounding, and flipped it open. Inside, page after page filled with my name, repeated over and over. Some of them in block letters, some in shaky cursive. I stepped back, blood draining from my face. He hadn't just been hiding. He had been waiting, watching, writing, preparing. I backed away from the notebook, every part of me screaming to run, but my legs felt rooted to the attic floor. The air was too still, like the room itself was holding its breath. I turned quickly and climbed down the steps, pulling the attic door shut behind me. I locked it with shaking hands and backed into the hallway eyes on the ceiling. I didn't stop moving until I was outside, standing barefoot in the snow, the cold biting into my skin, but grounding me in reality. I called the sheriff's office, voice barely steady, and they arrived within the hour. I expected them to find someone still up there, maybe asleep in that corner, but the attic was empty. Completely. No sleeping bag, no food, no notebook, just boxes and dust, like I had imagined it all. But I know what I saw. I know what I held in my hands. The deputy looked at me like I was tired, overworked. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. I left that day and never went back. Adam swears no one else has ever stayed there. But here's the part that still keeps me up. A week later, I got a package at my apartment. No return address, no note. Inside was a single page torn from a notebook. My name, written once in shaky cursive, the same way I had seen it before. Only this time at the bottom of the page, it said one thing more. Still here. Story 4. The Frozen Lot. I had worked the night shift at the old mountain gas station for about 7 months, and winter made it feel like I was on another planet. The place sat just off a winding highway near the Virginia border, surrounded by dense pine and long stretches of snow-covered road. It was the kind of station truckers used to fill up, grab coffee, and vanish into the dark again. Locals avoided it after sunset. Said it gave them a bad feeling. I never paid that much attention to rumors. It was a job. Quiet, steady, and on most nights, boring. That night, it was snowing hard. The parking lot was a frozen sheet of black ice, and only 2 trucks had stopped by in the last 3 hours. I kept the lights dim to save power and huddled behind the counter with a cup of stale coffee. Around 1:40 a.m., the bell over the door chimed. I looked up and froze. The man who stepped in wore a heavy coat zipped all the way up and a dark knit hat pulled low over his brow. His eyes locked on mine the second he entered. He didn't smile, didn't say anything, just walked slowly toward the back coolers. Something about him felt off. Not aggressive, just wrong. He moved like he didn't belong in his own skin. I kept one hand near the emergency phone beneath the register. Tried to stay calm. People came through here all the time. But this one was different. I could feel it. The kind of feeling that seeps into your bones before your brain catches up. And I knew the night was about to change. He stayed near the coolers for a while, not grabbing anything, just staring at the glass doors like he had forgotten what he came in for. I watched from the counter, pretending to check the receipt paper on the register, my eyes flicking up every few seconds. Eventually, he pulled out a bottle of water and a prepackaged sandwich, then walked toward me without a word. His boots didn't make a sound on the tile, which somehow made me more uneasy. He placed the items on the counter and finally spoke. His voice was flat, too low. Just 2 words. That all I nodded, rang him up, and told him the total. He paid in cash. His hands were dry and pale, like he had been out in the cold too long. After I handed him the change, he paused. Not like he forgot something, more like he was watching me for a reaction. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. Cold night out there. Be careful walking to your car. I froze. I had never told him I was getting off soon, never mentioned anything about my shift. He turned and walked out before I could respond, the door chiming softly behind him. I moved to the window and peeked outside. He didn't get into a car. He just walked off into the snow, disappearing behind one of the big rigs parked at the far end of the lot. I stood there for a long time, heart thudding, trying to tell myself it was just a weird guy passing through. But when I finally looked down at the glass door, I saw it. A perfect handprint, pressed from the outside, still fresh. And it was at the passenger side of my car. By the time 2 a.m. rolled around, I had locked the front door, turned off the overhead lights, and counted the till. My shift was over, but I couldn't shake the image of that handprint. The way he said I should be careful. It looped in my head as I put on my coat and stepped into the freezing night. The parking lot was a silent sheet of ice, lit only by the flickering glow from the vending machines. My car was parked near the edge of the lot, far from the building. I started walking quickly, eyes scanning the shadows between the trucks. Everything looked still, but the kind of stillness that felt too intentional. I reached my car and hit the unlock button. The headlights blinked, but there was something strange about them, dimmer than usual. I climbed in, locked the doors, and tried the ignition. Nothing. Just a dull click. I tried again. Still nothing. My car had never given me trouble before. I checked the dome light. It flickered weakly, like the battery had been drained. I glanced up at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting in the back seat. It was empty. But my breath caught when I looked out the windshield. Footprints, a single trail of them. They circled the car. Twice, then stopped just behind the trunk. I gripped my phone and dialed fast, hands shaking. No signal. The snow began to fall harder. I was alone, stranded. And I was starting to believe that someone had made sure of it. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, eyes locked on the snowy lot beyond the windshield. The footprints were still there, sharp and fresh in the thin dusting of snow. No other tracks, just that single set circling, watching. I didn't dare turn off the dome light, even though it was barely flickering now. I reached for the glove box and pulled out the small flashlight I kept there, switched it on, and swept the beam across the rear seats again. Empty. My breath fogged the inside of the windows as the cold seeped in. I tried the ignition one more time. Nothing, not even a click. I was trapped, boxed in by trucks, my car useless, and whoever had been outside was still nearby. I cracked the window slightly and listened. The only sound was the soft hiss of falling snow. Then a crunch, a slow, deliberate step, then another. I turned the flashlight toward the rear view again, but saw nothing. The next sound was closer, just outside the driver's door. I leaned forward, heart pounding, and before I could react, the window next to me exploded inward. Glass sprayed across my lap as a hand reached through the gap and grabbed my arm. I screamed and fought back instinctively, hitting the horn, kicking, twisting. His grip was tight, but I managed to wrench free and slam my elbow into the side of his head. He didn't speak, didn't yell, just grunted and pulled harder. That blank knit hat from earlier now pulled lower over his face. I fumbled for my phone, lifting it toward the broken window, screaming that I'd called the cops, that they were on the way. I hadn't, but I needed him to think I had. For a moment he hesitated, just enough. Then headlights filled the lot from behind, a car, fast. The man let go and vanished into the shadows between trucks just as the vehicle skidded to a stop beside me. It was my co-worker, Jared. He jumped out, waving a flashlight and shouting. I opened the door and stumbled into the snow breath, ragged. I was safe for now. But I knew that man had been waiting, watching, and he had planned every second. The police arrived 20 minutes later, their lights flashing against the snow-covered lot, casting long shadows between the trucks. I gave them everything I could remember, his clothes, his voice, the way he had spoken to me before he disappeared. They took photos of the broken window, measured the footprints, and swept the area. But by then, the snow had already begun to cover his tracks. One of the officers told me gently that people like him sometimes drift through these mountains in winter. Desperate, unstable, dangerous. But what haunted me was not what he did. It was what he knew. When they ran my plates to finish the report, one of the deputies looked puzzled. "This your current address?" he asked. I nodded. He frowned and looked back at the screen. There was a note attached. A non-criminal report filed a week earlier. A man had come to the local station asking about me. Said he was my uncle. Wanted to know if I still worked nights. Said he had lost contact and just wanted to find me. I don't have an uncle. Not one that lives anywhere near here. I asked what name he gave. The officer checked his notes. No name. Just a question. Is she still working alone? Story 5. The Ruby in the Trail. Emily had always been the brave one. Ever since we were kids growing up in the shadow of the Appalachians, she was the one climbing the tallest trees, wandering the longest trails, and chasing every strange sound in the woods without hesitation. So when she told me she planned to do a solo winter trek through a remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail, I wasn't surprised. Concerned, yes, but not surprised. She had it all planned out. A 10-day hike solo for the first week, and I'd meet her at a midpoint shelter with fresh supplies, clean clothes, and warm food. We'd spend the weekend together, and she'd finish the last leg of the trail alone. She had done harder hikes before, but never in December, and never through a region this isolated. Still, I trusted her judgment. She was smart, capable, and carried a satellite phone just in case. The morning I dropped her off at the trailhead, the snow was light and dry, the sky overcast and the wind sharp. Before she disappeared into the trees, she hugged me tight and said one last thing that I thought was odd at the time. "If anything happens, bring the ruby." I stared at her confused. She smiled and added Mom's necklace, top drawer of the nightstand. I nodded, said okay, and watched her vanish into the pines. At the time, I thought it was just Emily being dramatic. But now, I wonder if she already knew what was waiting for her out there. I met Emily at the designated shelter 6 days later, just before sunset. The snow was deeper than expected, and the air had that biting cold that made even breathing feel sharp. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the fire ring, wrapped in her sleeping bag, staring into the woods like she expected something to come walking out. At first glance, she looked fine thin, but strong cheeks red from the wind. But when she turned to me, something in her eyes felt distant, almost glazed. She hugged me, but it felt half-hearted, distracted. I asked how the hike had been, and she gave vague answers. Fine, quiet, cold. She didn't smile much, and she kept glancing behind me, as if waiting for someone else to arrive. That night, as we sat by the fire, I asked her about the ruby necklace. She looked up sharply, like she had forgotten she even mentioned it. "Did you bring it?" I nodded and pulled it from my pack. Her hands shook slightly as she took it from me, clutching it tight like a child with a toy. She didn't put it on, just held it in her lap and stared at it. I tried to ask her more about the trail, the weather, the people she might have met, but her answers were clipped, distracted. When I offered her food, she ate quickly, almost desperately, like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Then she mumbled something under her breath. I didn't catch it at first, so I leaned in and asked again. She whispered, "He said I needed it to stay safe." I froze. Who, I asked. But she didn't answer. She just looked back at the woods, eyes wide, like they might answer for her. That night, the shelter felt colder than it should have. We had a fire going, thick sleeping bags. Even the walls of the old lean-to gave some protection from the wind. But the cold sank into my bones, like something alive. Emily didn't speak much after the necklace conversation. She curled up tight in her sleeping bag, clutching the ruby like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. I laid awake beside her, watching the flames dance on the stone wall across from us, listening to the crackle of the fire and the wind howling through the trees. Just after midnight, I heard her muttering in her sleep. I leaned over, thinking maybe she was having a nightmare. Her eyes were open, glossy, fixed on something behind me. I turned, but there was nothing. Just the darkness beyond the shelter and the trees swaying in the wind. She whispered again, louder this time. "He's watching." I asked who. She didn't answer. She just pulled the sleeping bag higher and turned away. I stayed up for another hour, nerves tight, flashlight in hand, but nothing moved. No footsteps, no voices. Just that unsettling silence that falls over deep woods in winter. Eventually, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was the sound of something clinking. Metal against metal. I sat up fast. Emily was gone. I called her name, stumbled out into the snow in my boots and thermal shirt, flashlight beams swinging across the clearing. Then I saw her, standing just beyond the tree line, barefoot, holding the necklace out in front of her like an offering. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear the words. When I reached her, she didn't resist, just blinked slowly and said, "I almost forgot. He comes at night. He waits." I don't think she was asleep. I don't even think she was fully there anymore. I guided Emily back to the shelter in silence. Her feet were red and raw from the snow, and she winced with every step, but never once asked for help. She held the ruby necklace tight, fingers locked around it, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. We didn't speak. We just lay there side by side, listening to the fire burn down to embers. At some point, I drifted off, not deeply, just enough for my body to rest. When I woke again, the fire was out, and Emily was sitting up staring into the darkness. I reached for my water bottle, and that's when I saw it. A man crouched just beyond the shelter. Pale coat, hood pulled low. I froze. He didn't move, didn't speak, just crouched there, watching. My voice caught in my throat. I blinked and he was gone. I scrambled for the flashlight and swept it across the snow, but there were no footprints, nothing. When I turned back to the shelter, something caught my eye. My water bottle. The cap was loose, just slightly. I never leave it like that. I opened it and sniffed. A bitter chemical smell hit my nose. I looked over at Emily's bottle. Same. Cap turned just enough to look untouched. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed both and hurled them into the snow. Emily didn't even flinch. I crouched beside her and whispered, "Someone was here. Someone tried to drug us." Her response chilled me to the bone. "I know. He said we had to forget, or we'd never leave." At dawn, we packed in silence. Neither of us ate. Neither of us drank. The only sound was the crunch of our boots in the snow as we made our way back to the trailhead, retracing Emily's steps from days before. Her eyes stayed on the trees the whole time, like she was expecting someone or something to follow. When we reached the road, I called the authorities. A ranger met us an hour later, and I explained what had happened. The man, the bottles, the necklace. He listened carefully, but his expression never changed. Then he said something that has haunted me since. "You're not the first to mention him." He didn't elaborate, just thanked us and said he'd pass the report along. Before we left, Emily pressed the ruby into my palm. "You keep it now," she whispered. I never asked why. I didn't want to know. That night back home, I sat at my kitchen table and turned the necklace over in my hands. The stone caught the light just right, glowing faintly red. For a second, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch. I froze, but it was nothing, just the wind. Or maybe not. Maybe the ruby didn't keep her safe. Maybe it just showed her who to fear. Story 6. The Man Who Knocked After Midnight. I've lived most of my life in the Rocky Mountains. Out here, winter doesn't just visit, it takes over. It buries everything in silence and makes you question your own breath. The snow doesn't care if you've lived here 20 years or if you just got here yesterday. It's equal parts beautiful and brutal. My wife and I chose this life for the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from being 40 minutes away from the nearest neighbor. No traffic, no sirens. Just wind and wood and the creak of old timber when the temperature drops below 10. Our cabin sits on a ridge about a mile above a frozen lake, surrounded by pine and spruce. In summer, it's idyllic. In winter, it becomes something else entirely. Time slows out here during the cold months. You start measuring your days in firewood, not minutes. You learn quickly that if something goes wrong, help won't arrive in time. And so you become your own safety net, your own alarm system, your own rescue plan. One thing people don't talk about enough is how winter plays tricks on your senses. Sound doesn't travel the same way. Things that should be loud become whispers, and things that should be far off sound close. You'll hear a fox scream 2 ridges away and swear it's at your window. That kind of environment trains you to trust your gut, not just for survival, but for sanity. Because when it's just you and your thoughts and the snow swallowing every sound you make, your instincts are all you have left. Some people call it paranoia. I call it experience. And it was that exact experience that made me realize something wasn't right the night we came home from the winter bonfire party. Something had shifted, and the forest knew. That night, we left the bonfire around midnight. It had been one of those rare winter gatherings where everyone came out despite the cold, wrapped in layers, laughing over hot cider, swapping stories beside the flames. The trail back to our cabin was packed with snow but manageable. I knew those turns by memory, the tight curve around Dead Pine Ridge, the slope near the frozen creek that always iced over first. My wife was in a good mood, cheeks red from the firelight and whiskey singing softly under her breath as we pulled up the last hill. The truck tires crunched through the snow with that hollow winter sound I've grown to know as home. When we reached the cabin, everything looked normal. The porch lights had turned on, automatically casting a yellow glow across the snowbanks. I killed the engine, and for a moment we just sat there. No wind, no movement. Just the kind of stillness that only exists in a frozen forest after midnight. We laughed again as we stepped out, our boots sinking into fresh powder. The snow muffled everything, making our voices sound too loud and too close. We brought in the leftover food, hung up our coats, and settled onto the old leather couch with mugs of tea to let the warmth return to our fingers. I remember feeling lucky. Grateful even. Until my wife turned toward the window with a look I hadn't seen all night. She wasn't smiling anymore. And in that one glance, I knew something had followed us home. She leaned in, staring at the frost-laced window for a long moment, then whispered, "Did you see that?" Her voice was too calm, the kind of calm that only comes when you're trying not to panic. I followed her gaze, but all I saw was the moonlight stretching across the snow, catching the edges of the pine trees in a soft silver glow. "What did you see?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I thought I saw someone move, right past the edge of the porch." I tried to laugh it off, suggested maybe it was a deer or the wind pushing the trees, but even I didn't believe it. The cold in the room had shifted, not in temperature but in feeling. That invisible weight you can't describe, but you know it's there. We got up together and checked every door and window. Locked, bolted, secure. Still, I grabbed the shotgun from above the mantel and leaned it by the door just in case. When I stepped out onto the porch to double-check the generator, that's when I saw it. A single line of boot prints, fresh in the snow, leading up to the side of the house. Not toward the door, toward the window. Right below where we had been sitting. My chest tightened. The snow was untouched in every direction, except that one path. No prints going away, just coming in. And the thing that truly froze my blood wasn't the size or depth of the tracks. It was the pattern. They matched my own boots. Not just the brand, the exact wear. The heel chip on the left foot, the split near the toe. I hadn't been near that window all night, so who had I stepped back inside and locked the door behind me, trying to calm the sudden rush in my chest? I didn't say anything to my wife. Not yet. I didn't want to scare her if it turned out to be some kind of misunderstanding, though deep down, I knew it wasn't. She was still sitting on the couch, clutching the mug in both hands, eyes fixed on the window, like it might blink. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the faint ticking of the stove and the occasional crack of ice shifting on the roof. Then it came. A knock. Not frantic, not even forceful. Just 3 steady, deliberate knocks on the front door. We both froze. My wife slowly set down her cup, her eyes wide. No one knocks on our door at that hour, especially not in winter, especially not without headlights or the sound of a snowmobile approaching. I stood and moved to the door, keeping my hand on the shotgun leaning against the wall. "Who is it?" I asked, loud enough to carry through the thick wood. A man's voice replied, oddly casual. "Sorry to bother you." My truck slid into a ditch down the hill. My daughter's in the cab. We're cold. "Could we use your phone?" The moment he spoke, my stomach dropped. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. I couldn't place it, not yet, but something about it felt rehearsed, polished, too smooth for a man in trouble. I asked for his name. He said Brian. I asked where he lived. He said just east of here. But there was no one named Brian within 30 miles. I knew every person in this region by name. And there had never been a Brian, I didn't open the door. Instead, I turned to my wife and gave her a look that said everything without words. She nodded and slipped down the hallway toward the bedroom where we kept the spare rifle and emergency radio. I stayed near the door, my voice steady but low. "Do you want me to call for help?" I asked the man outside. His answer came too quickly. "No need for that. Just a phone, that's all. We'll be gone in a minute." I stepped away from the door as quietly as I could and looked through the side window, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Nothing. Just the cold wind blowing powdery snow across the porch. No vehicle? No footprints where there should have been at least 2 sets, his and the daughter he claimed to have. My heart was beating hard now. Not with panic, but with clarity. Something was wrong. I called back, "Can I speak to your daughter just to make sure she's okay?" Silence. Long. Too long. Then a strange mechanical sort of laugh, like someone forcing it through gritted teeth. "She's shy," he said finally. "She's just cold and wants to get home." That was the moment the act crumbled. I knew. I don't know how, but I knew. I reached for the shotgun just as my wife returned, rifle in hand, face pale but composed. "We're not letting him in," she said. "He's lying." As if cued by her words, the voice outside changed. It rose in anger. "Open the door, or I'll break it down." Then a blast shattered the small front window. Glass exploded inward, sharp and loud. We hit the floor. He screamed again, "You're surrounded. You won't make it till morning." The shot had come from close, maybe 5 feet from the porch, and the force of it rattled more than just the glass. My wife and I lay flat on the wooden floor, hearts pounding, snow drifting in through the broken pane like ash. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she grabbed my sleeve and whispered, "The cellar. Now." We crawled toward the kitchen and lifted the trap door that led to the old root cellar. It wasn't much stone wall shelves of canned food, but it had one thing we needed: a back exit that opened onto the slope behind the house. We had never used it in years, but right now it was our only chance. As I closed the trap door above us, we heard footsteps upstairs. More than one set, slow, confident. Whoever they were inside now. We moved fast. I handed her the rifle, grabbed the emergency flare gun, and shoved open the narrow exit door. A wall of wind and snow met us. The blizzard had rolled in full force. We pushed through it, half blind, stumbling down the hill and into the tree line. I couldn't hear if anyone followed. Couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. But I knew the forest better than they did. The snow soaked through our clothes almost immediately, and the cold bit deep, but we kept going. Behind us, the glow of our cabin was lost in the storm. We didn't stop. Not to look back. Not to breathe. Just kept running into the dark, hoping the trees would hide us. We stayed hidden in the forest until dawn, curled behind a fallen tree covered in snow and silence. When the wind died down and the first gray light broke through the branches, we made our way to the neighbor's property, a long frozen walk that took nearly 2 hours. They called the sheriff, and soon the cabin was swarming with local deputies and trackers. What they found left everyone shaken. The front door had been splintered, windows shattered, furniture destroyed, cupboards torn from the walls, but nothing stolen. No tracks led away from the house, just the ones that surrounded it. 9 sets of boots, all different, all heavy. And the strange part, no tire marks, no snowmobile tracks. It was as if they'd appeared from the storm itself and vanished just the same. The sheriff shook his head, said he'd never seen anything like it. We stayed with the neighbors for weeks, too scared to go back. Eventually, we returned. The cabin felt colder, not from weather, but memory. And then, 3 days later, as I was cleaning up broken glass in the living room, I found something buried beneath the snow by the window, a burned cassette tape. I played it, a voicemail from 7 years ago. The voice, it was Brian, but Brian died in a fire. I was at the funeral. I carried the casket. Story 7. The Snowfall Trap. I had always wanted to hike the Upper Peninsula in winter. There was something about the silence of the snow-covered forests in northern Michigan that pulled at me. My best friend Jason and I had talked about doing it for years, and finally we settled on early February. It would be cold, sure, but we were prepared. We had done the Appalachian trails, the Rockies, even parts of the Canadian backcountry. This was supposed to be the next great memory in our long list of outdoor adventures. But 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Jason called and told me his mom had fallen down the stairs. He had to cancel. I told him we could wait until next year, but he said no. He insisted I go without him. Said he would be pissed if I missed out on the perfect winter weekend because of something he could not control. So I packed the gear. I planned the 3-day route, checked the weather, logged my itinerary with the ranger station, and headed north alone. I'd done solo hikes before, just never in winter. Never in that kind of isolation. But I told myself I was ready. The trail I picked was marked but rarely used during snow season. That was part of the appeal. Fresh snow, clean air, nothing but frozen rivers and pine. The kind of place where you could walk for hours and hear nothing but your own boots and breath. The first night went smoothly. I camped beside a frozen creek, made a fire, ate my dinner under stars that looked like they belonged to a different world. But the second day, that is when everything started to change. And the reason I will never hike alone in winter again. I broke camp just after sunrise. The air was still and heavy, the kind of stillness that makes sound feel distant, like it's been swallowed by the snow. I followed the trail for a few hours without seeing another soul. Just animal tracks and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Around mid-morning, I reached a small ridge overlooking a frozen lake. That's when I saw him. A man standing near the edge of the ice, hands in his pockets, staring across the lake like he was waiting for something. He turned when he heard me approach and smiled. He was tall, well-dressed, maybe too well-dressed for someone out here alone. His jacket was spotless. His boots looked brand new. No snow on his shoulders, no breath fogging in the air. It struck me as strange, but I told myself maybe he was just better prepared than I was. He greeted me warmly, said he had been hiking the area for a week and had found something incredible nearby. A glacier cave, he called it, off the main trail, completely untouched. He described it in detail, the way the light bounced off the ice, how it felt like stepping into another world. But it was the way he talked that unsettled me. Too smooth, too rehearsed, like he had practiced the pitch 100 times. I asked him where he was camped. He said just past the ridge, then quickly changed the subject. He told me the cave was not on any maps. Said most people never find it because they take the wrong turn. Said he could show me, or I could follow his directions. Then he smiled again and walked off toward the trees. I stood there for a long time, unsure if I had just met a fellow hiker or something else entirely. I watched him disappear into the trees, and for a moment I told myself to just keep going. Stick to the plan. Stay on the marked trail. But something about his voice lingered in my head. The way he described that glacier cave, like it wasn't just beautiful, but otherworldly. I had never heard anyone speak about nature that way, like it wasn't just worth seeing, but meant for you specifically. I waited another 10 minutes, trying to brush it off, Then I turned. His directions were oddly specific. Past the bent pine that forks over the snow like a claw. Cross the stream that hums like wind chimes. The language was poetic, too vivid for a stranger in the woods. But when I followed it, everything he said was exactly where it should be. The clawed pine, the frozen stream with wind whispering through branches above. It was unsettling how right he had been. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. The snow was deeper here. The trail, if there ever was one, had vanished. I pushed forward, the silence around me thick and unnatural. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots. After an hour, I realized how far I had gone off path. I reached for my phone to check the GPS. No signal. I turned to retrace my steps, but already the snow had covered most of them. That was when I felt it, that old, unmistakable feeling every hiker knows at some point. I was being watched, not followed, watched. Like whatever it was had been here long before I arrived. And was waiting. I scanned the trees, but saw nothing. Only the white. Only the stillness. And somewhere behind it, something I could not name. I kept moving, telling myself it was just nerves. Just the quiet getting to me. But the feeling wouldn't leave. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, certain I'd see something step out from behind a tree. But nothing came. Just more snow, more silence. I started to climb a shallow slope that rose into a thicket of evergreens, each branch heavy with snow. That's when it happened. One step, then nothing. The ground vanished beneath me. It didn't crumble or crack. It gave way completely, like a curtain being yanked from under my feet. I fell hard, crashing through a narrow shaft and slamming into something below. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs. Pain exploded in my side, and my left arm twisted beneath me at an impossible angle. I couldn't move for a moment, couldn't even cry out. When I finally caught my breath, I looked around. I was in a pit maybe 10 feet deep, maybe more. The snow above filtered the light, giving everything a gray-blue glow. And then I noticed the walls. Not natural. Dug. The sides were packed earth and layered snow shaped by tools, not time. And the floor covered in sticks arranged in a strange pattern with one sharpened branch piercing clean through my jacket into my side. It missed anything vital, but the pain was unreal. I reached up, tried to pull myself out, but the walls crumbled with every attempt. I was stuck. Trapped. And then I remembered the man. His perfect clothes, the 2 specific directions, the way he smiled like this had all been rehearsed. My breath caught again, not from the pain this time, but from the cold truth settling in my bones. This wasn't an accident. Someone had planned this. For me. I tried yelling at first, my voice cracking in the frozen air, but the snow above swallowed the sound before it could carry. I shouted until my throat burned, but no one answered. No birds took flight, no branches rustled. Just the pit, the trees, and the weight of realization pressing down on me. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. My arm was useless, my side throbbed with every breath, and the pit was too deep to climb one-handed. That's when I heard it. Footsteps above me. Slow, measured, crunching softly on the snow. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. Then, without warning, a shadow passed over the opening. Something or someone was up there. I pressed myself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. A moment later, a dark sheet of tarp slid across the opening, sealing me in. The world dimmed. Everything turned cold in a different way. Then something dropped. A small metal canister hit the floor beside me with a dull clink. It hissed. A thin, colorless gas leaked out and filled the pit fast. I held my breath as long as I could, eyes burning, lungs screaming. But eventually, I had to inhale. The world began to spin. My thoughts blurred. I heard a voice, maybe real, maybe imagined, whispering just above me. Then everything went black. Not sleep, not unconsciousness, just gone. As if someone had reached into my mind and pulled the switch. And I knew whoever set this trap wasn't done yet. Not even close. Time disappeared after that. I didn't wake up in any way I could understand. It was more like surfacing for seconds at a time, then slipping under again. In those fragments, I remember faces blurred, expressionless, sometimes leaning in close eyes, scanning me like I was an object. I remember pain in my arm and someone stitching the wound with rough, hurried hands. I remember the taste of something metallic, maybe broth or water, forced between my lips. And there was a voice. A woman's voice. Soft, afraid, whispering things I couldn't fully grasp. I never saw her face clearly. Just a silhouette in dim light. At one point, I think she held my hand. Another time, I heard her crying in the corner of whatever place they were keeping me. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Every time I woke, it was a different position. A different light, a different sound. Like they were moving me, examining me, deciding what to do. And all through it, that same cold emptiness inside me grew louder than any scream. I wasn't a person to them. I was a thing, a catch. And I didn't know if I would ever be let go. The last thing I remember clearly is the woman, the same soft voice guiding me through the dark. I was too weak to walk, but she half carried me, whispering, "Almost there, just a little farther." We stopped by the side of a road. She placed something in my coat pocket, pressed her hand to my chest, then vanished into the trees. Moments later, headlights approached. Then nothing. When I woke again, I was in a hospital bed 3 days later, bruised, broken, and missing nearly 2 weeks of my life. No one ever found her. No one ever explained where I had been. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.